In Rome, the price of glory was settled in a public ritual, not in coin, but in bodies and silence. Tariffs listed grain and wine. The parade of shame priced a life. Who paid for marble triumphs when the city gathered to witness humiliation as ceremony? The chronicles fall quiet, but streets, ledgers, and bones will speak. Viewer discretion advised. If you value the historical record, subscribe. When the ledger closes, the bones still speak. Picture dawn lifting over the forum. Shop fronts unlatch. Incense from a side shrine mixes with the sour of last night's wine. Then chains. Heads turn, not because a crime is punished, but because a lesson is about to be performed. Officials steer the condemned along a route chosen for witnesses past a temple where she once prayed beneath balconies, that once called her name through the market where prices and gossip move together. The halts are timed, children are nudged forward, elders watch without speaking. Participation is simple to see is to be bound by it. Shame is collected like tax. We will follow that ritual from street to amphitheatre, where myths become punishments, and the crowd's gaze is part of the machinery. We will keep the spectacle in proportion to the sources testing legend against evidence. And we will ask the only question that matters when ceremony becomes cruelty. Who profits when humiliation is made public, rehearsed and sold as order? This is not gore for its own sake. It is logistics, stagecraft, and law, the operating system of fear disguised as tradition. At first light, the city stages its lesson. The air tastes of sour wine and last night's ashes. Shutters go up like eyelids. Then the sound that reorganizes a street iron on stone, a rhythm measured in links. A woman bare bruised, smeared with filth, stumbles between guards. What happens next is not a brawl or a mob's accident. It is choreography. Rome calls it justice, but it functions as a public ritual of warning. The route is not chosen for speed. It is drafted like a map of her life. She is steered past the shrine where she used to whisper petitions through the market, where the fishmongers remember her voice beneath the balcony of an aunt who once greeted her at dusk. At each station, the guards halt not long enough to kill momentum, just long enough to widen the circle of witnesses. Neighbors lean on lintels. Children are nudged forward, traders hold coins mid-air, the transaction pausing to price a life. A few in the crowd spit. Some throw vegetables, then stones. This is pedagogy. By spectacle, humiliation collected like tax. When she raises her hands to cover herself, the correction is swift. Fingers are pried back until they crack, then left to hang as proof that the body may not edit the lesson. When she tries to sink to the ground, thinking heightlessness will make her smaller, the chain goes taut. A guard jerks, and she lurches upright again. The point is not to move her quickly, but to display her thoroughly. The city must learn not only that Roman law punishes, but that it possesses the gaze, the angles, the right to decide which parts of a person are visible and for how long. You can read the training of the escort in their timing. They avoid bottlenecks that would trap them, yet they choose corners where sound swirls and echoes magnifying ridicule. They stop outside doorways with deep thresholds that stage the family as forced audience. Parents do not look away. Some are seen to throw a pebble, because participation proves loyalty. A son watches his mother teach a daughter how not to be the woman in the street. Walk straight. Speak softly. Do not provoke the taller orders of men. The lesson is simple, and cruel obedience equals life. Resistance equals theatre. Not every face in the crowd is savage. Some flinch. A few feel sickness coil under the ribs. One old man makes the sign of a god he barely believes in. But the street rules are clear. Dissent must be private. Pity must be quiet. And the procession must not be slowed. Even silence can become complicity when the ritual demands witnesses. A poet once wrote lines about such mornings, half jest, half ledger. The city loves a show, and shows require props, wreaths, sand beasts, the condemned. He joked that myths are made real for the crowd, but the joke cuts because the crowd laughs. In that laughter is a second violence, the normalization of what should be unthinkable. The guards understand this. They are not merely wardens, they are stagehands. One slaps off a child's hand when it reaches to touch the chain, then turns the chain so its brighter side catches the sun. Even cruelty has a best angle. There is a destination. Everyone knows it. The amphitheater opens its throat at the far end of the route, promising closure. But the procession is its own chapter of punishment. It erases the condemned's civic identity before the arena erases her body. Past the Statue of Victory, past the shop where she bought lamp oil, past the well, whose rope burn once marked her palms, every landmark is conscripted into testimony. Her world shrinks to the perimeter of the crowd. Stories travel alongside her. Some say she committed adultery. Others whisper treason. Still others insist it was smaller, pettier, refusing a powerful man's reach. Crossing a line no law will admit. The parade does not clarify, it amplifies. By the time the arena gates loom, rumor has multiplied into certainty. She deserves what is coming because the city has seen her deserve it. Vision becomes verdict. At the last pause, just before stone gives way to sand, the guards perform a final calibration. Water is thrown not to cleanse, but to make filth run in streaks the audience can read. A torch is lowered to singe hair because the smell bruises memory. One guard lifts her chin with 2 fingers, not gently, and angles her face toward tiers of balconies already crowded. A herald recites nothing of her case, only the sentence to the beasts. The words land with the force of a tradition that needs no explanation. The crowd surges bodies, pressing like a tide around a rock. Vendors shout. A child laughs at something stupid and bright on a stick. Somewhere, a mother drags her boy closer. Look, remember. Somewhere else, a sister turns away and pretends to count figs. The city has fulfilled its part. It has looked. The officials have fulfilled theirs. They have arranged the looking so that dignity cannot survive it. When the gate grinds open, the parade's logic becomes plain. The street has softened the audience for what follows, drained the last pockets of pity, and bound thousands into a single consenting eye. This was the warm-up, the catechism before the creed. Inside the sand waits, and the myths are already choosing their costumes. Stop! The sentence has a beautiful, almost clinical Latin name, damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. In practice, it meant that a person would be offered to an animal, as if the body were a prop in a state pageant. Roman writers and later compilers are blunt about it. Certain categories of the condemned rebels, bandits, slaves, sometimes Christians and other noxiae, could be thrown to lions, leopards, bears, even packs of dogs. The point was not only to end a life, but to do it in a way that taught a lesson about Rome's hierarchy. The unruly were classed with creatures, and creatures were tools of law. Administratively, damnatio, ad bestias, lived inside a bigger machine. The amphitheater system, stone sand stairwells, gates, keepers, beast handlers, vendors, heralds, scribes, each with a task and a budget line. The building itself was a device for magnifying punishment. Elliptical sightlines, tiered seating, by status, a floor engineered with trapdoors and service corridors beneath. Antiquarians describe how amphitheaters were purpose-built for the ludi, amphitheatrales beast shows, executions staged, combats, each segment timetabled like liturgy. A typical program followed a rhythm the crowd could chant in its sleep. Morning venations, hunts and displays, when handlers drove exotic animals across the sand, pitting trained fighters or contraptions against them. Midday punishments of the noxii. The condemned often including damnatio ad bestias. Afternoon, the munera. Gladiatorial bouts with their own hierarchies and contracts. The state's message was efficient. Begin with wonder and appetite. Break the day on the wheel of law. Then end with sport that risked death but promised skill and reversal. Even 19th century reference works collating earlier sources preserve that sequence. Beasts at dawn executions toward the day's cruel noon, and gladiators after the shadow has turned. To make the beasts into instruments, the state had to run a supply chain. Animals arrived crated, starved to an edge, prodded into fury, or trained to perform set movements on cue. Keepers synchronized release gates with drum beats. Scent lures drew a lion toward the center instead of up into the barriers. Sand was raked for traction so a bull would not stumble too soon. The cruelty was not improvised, it was engineered. The administration scheduled which punishments fit, which festival, how many animals the treasury could afford, how long the crowd should be held at fever pitch before the next act. In accounts and anecdotes, we glimpse this bookkeeping of pain cages fodder handlers' pay, a log of spectacles counted not just in deaths, but in days of public satisfaction. Sometimes, the execution was simple. A figure chained to a stake while a cat or bear did its work. Sometimes more elaborate, a scaffold, a wheeled device, a hidden spring that dropped a victim into a confined space, with an animal goaded beyond fear. The Romans had a verb for it, obicere bestiis, to throw before beasts. But throwing was only the end of a process that began with indictment and ended with applause. What transformed brutality into policy was the amphitheater's capacity to turn punishment into a shared civic act. Ticket seating orders, magistrates in attendance, a herald to read the sentence. Musicians to stitch scenes together. And then there were the productions that blurred the line between killing and theatre. Modern scholarship labels them fatal charades, executions staged as mythological reenactments so that the killing doubled as a living illustration from poetry Dirce tied to a bull. Orpheus, torn by beasts Pasiphae with the Cretan bull. The poet Martial, celebrating the inaugural shows of the Flavian amphitheatre, boasts that the arena made the old stories true, a boast that only makes moral sense if spectators could see a myth in the outline of a body. Whether every detail was literal, or some effects were contrived with props and illusion, the intention is clear to graft Rome's authority onto the authority of myth, so that law felt older than any appeal against it. The schedule helped the myths land. After hours of animal astonishment, the eyes were trained for movement, the ears for roar and drum. When the condemned entered, costumed as a figure from story, the crowd already knew the cues. The administrative file charge judgment transport order had become a libretto. A gate opened, a cue sounded, and the state delivered its moral through blood and symbol at once. That doubling mattered. It allowed Roman power to pretend it was not inventing pain, but channeling tradition. It allowed spectators to say they had witnessed not merely a killing, but a lesson. And it allowed magistrates to defend the budget. This was religion and theatre, not just punishment. Seen from the floor, though, the elegance disappears. You hear the keeper hiss to bring a leopard's head toward the right quarter so the tears can see. You feel the waiting built into the program, the long minutes when nothing moves and the body becomes the whole horizon. From above, a prefect checks the time against the day's order of events. From below, minutes are an empire. The sentence called damnatio ad bestias did the legal work of declaring a person outside the city's protection. The amphitheatre did the political work of making everyone share in that declaration of turning sight into assent. By the time the arena crews rake the sand and haul off the carcasses, human animal, sometimes both the audience has already accepted the premise. Beasts are not beasts here. They are policy. And once policy has paws and teeth, it is hard to imagine a city that does not listen when it growls. Myth gave Rome the language of grandeur. The arena turned that language into grammar for killing. The crowd did not just watch a sentence. It watched a story it already knew, then watched the story end with a real body where a painted one used to be. Poets had primed them for this. In a slender book praising the new amphitheatre, Martial boasts that the old tales have come true, that Pasiphae really did meet the Cretan bull, and that whatever legend sings Caesar's arena can reproduce. The line sounds like flattery until you imagine a condemned woman in a mask with horns, or a contraption that makes a beast lunge at the right moment and you hear the boast snapping shut like a trap. Modern scholarship has given this fusion of theatre and death a cold exact name: fatal charades. Instead of a generic mauling, the condemned played a role from myth. Dirce strapped to a bull, Orpheus torn by beasts, the bandit Laureolus crucified and then attacked each scene. Chosen so that the emperor appeared as a restorer of cosmic order, while the criminal became the embodiment of disorder. The brilliance, if we can use the word for something so dark, was that the moral message rode on the audience's prior knowledge. They did not need a herald to explain why Dirce deserved the horns. The story already living in their heads supplied the verdict. But how literal were these enactments? Scholars argue the spectrum. Some episodes likely used stagecraft machinery and trained animals to suggest the myth without reproducing every obscene detail. Others seem brutally direct engineered to end in genuine death that mirrored the tale. Coleman's classic study traces the scattered ancient testimonies pointing to executions that advertised their mythic template in programmatic ways, names, costumes, props, while admitting that the sources oscillate between boast rumor and moralizing. The point, however, does not depend on proving a single sensational instance to modern standards. What is certain is the intent to yoke punishment to narrative, so that authority felt ancient, inevitable, and righteous. Take Pasiphae, the queen who lusted after a divine bull. Martial's epigram is shameless in its clarity. Believe it, we've seen it. The old story's true. Whether we imagine a human victim presented in bovine guise to a goaded animal or a staged illusion that safely simulated the act, the message for spectators was: the same Caesar's games can make fable into law, desire into sentence, woman into warning. The poem's boast functions as a press release for imperial power, promising an arena capable of outdoing antiquity itself. When spectators repeated that line at dinner, they spread the doctrine: Rome can make reality obey its myths. Or consider Dirce. In myth, she is punished by being tied to a bull and dashed to pieces. The arena's version, again reconstructed from hints, substituted a living condemned body for marble relief. The spectacle did not pretend to be random justice. It pretended to be old justice, as if the gods had written sentencing guidelines in hexameters. That sleight of hand mattered. It allowed a prefect's budget and a beastmaster's schedule to wear the mask of tradition. The crowd, recognizing the tale, completed the ritual by consenting with their eyes. The charade worked because the amphitheater had spent the morning teaching spectators how to see. After the Venationes choreographed hunts that trained the eye to track movement risk and reward, came the noon cruelty of the Noxii. By the time a costumed figure entered, the audience's attention was primed like a drumhead. A cue from the musicians, a painted backdrop, a prop mountain tree bull's yoke, and the myth clicked into place. From the administration's perspective, the logistics were as important as the morals: a fixed runtime, a reliable climax, a corpse removed on schedule, so the Menura could begin. Myth was not only ideology, it was programming. Some accounts show how thin the membrane could be between illusion and actuality. Reports of the criminal Laureolus suggest a staged crucifixion that became, in effect, a real one, with a bear set upon the immobilized victim, an execution narratively tied to bandit tales, theatrically framed to satisfy an audience that had been promised a story. Even if later retellings inflate details, the mechanism is visible. Borrow a myth's shape, fit it to a body. Let the crowd supply the meaning it already knows how to supply. The more famous the myth, the less the state had to explain its violence. For the people in the cheap seats, the lesson arrived with the speed of recognition. A wife squeezed her husband's hand, not because she admired the poetry, but because the scene rewired caution into her muscles. A father whispered to a son the line from Martial: "The arena makes legends true." Truth then became whatever the emperor could stage. That is the deeper purpose of fatal charades, not just to punish, but to author the meaning of punishment. When power can turn pasiphy from rumor into choreography, it also turns dissent into monstrosity, desire into treason, and the condemned into living punctuation for a moral the state writes. From the floor, the myth tastes like dust and iron. From the podium, it reads like policy working exactly as designed. And when the crews rake the sand and the next story takes its place, the previous one hardens into memory. We saw it, as Martial says, ready to be repeated at home over wine and fruit, where fear continues its quiet work long after the trumpet's echo dies. No execution in Rome was complete without its second protagonist, the crowd. Not a blur of faces, but a machine with rules, tears, and gestures, an audience trained as surely as the beast handlers were. Seating itself drilled the lesson. Senators near the sand, equestrians in their blocks, citizens stepped back by rank, women and the poor exiled to the upper benches. Boys even had a designated section beside their teachers, a built-in classroom of awe and obedience. The city had engineered a view that doubled as a civics course. Power was something you could literally see layered by height clothing and proximity to blood. From those benches, the audience did more than watch. It helped decide tempo tone, sometimes even outcome. A hush could unnerve the condemned. A roar could snap the last fiber of resolve. The famous thumb signal has been mythologized by paintings and movies, but the scholarship is thornier pollis verso turned thumb, likely signaled death, while mercy was a concealed or pressed thumb, not the modern thumbs up. Whatever the exact fingerwork spectators knew, the code, and the condemned read it in the sea of hands. The gesture debated in our time was functional in theirs. The crowd's will made visible. We know what the noise could do to a soul because one witness left us the moment of impact. Augustine tells how his friend Alypius, sworn to keep eyes shut against the game, sat rigid, while the arena swelled around him, until a mighty cry from the whole people struck him like a blow. Curiosity split his resolve. He opened his eyes for one heartbeat, and was wounded more deeply than the fighter bleeding below. The roar entered by his ears, and forced open his eyes, he writes, and from there the spectacle owned him. It is the clearest ancient description we have of spectatorship, as a kind of capture, the crowd's voice rewiring a single mind in real time. Once captured, attention becomes consent. That was the hidden craft of the producers to train the audience in a rhythm of appetite, judgment, and release. Morning dazzled with venationes, the noon hour punished the noxiae. Afternoon promised skill and reversal in the monera. Between acts, the vendors and musicians stitched the day into one continuous appetite. Even moralists who condemned the shows understood the harness. Tertullian rails that the game stoke rage discord, and the thrill of blood proof that the amphitheatre was not neutral stone, but a device for manufacturing feeling on schedule. Families attended, and that mattered. The law itself made room for children in the seating plan, ensuring they learned the city in cross-section authority at eye level, below punishment framed as order, and the emperor's gaze as the axis that held everything together. Women pushed to the upper rings by Augustan reforms still learned the choreography of fear from above. Boys kept near their tutors learned to read a sentence in the movement of a hand. The amphitheatre multiplied witnesses with administrative neatness. Did the people truly vote a victim's fate? Sometimes a presiding magistrate or editor staged that illusion, soliciting noise and gesture before pronouncing what was already decided by docket and program. The uncertainty about which exact thumb meant what is almost the point. The arena taught a language that only needed two meanings, prolong or end, and trained a whole city to speak it in unison. Corbeil's reading of Roman sources suggests mercy was the pressed or hidden thumb, death the hostile upright thumb. But even modern skeptics agree that the crowd's display carried moral weight, real or theatrically framed. Either way, the audience rehearsed power by performing it. Augustine's anecdote captures the psychology beneath the stone engineering. Alypius enters believing he can resist by closing his eyes. The city disabuses him in a single swell of sound. One fall, one cry, and the nervous system surrenders. He does not leave revolted. He leaves addicted proof that the arena could convert disgust into desire in one afternoon. That toggle is the show's true genius, to make spectatorship feel like civic duty, to wrap coercion in participation. Rome learned to outsource part of its cruelty to the stands. From the sand, a prisoner could look up and see not just the magistrate's order, but 10,000 faces agreeing with it. And so, the pedagogy of fear reached beyond the arena walls. On the walk home, a father might repeat Marshall's line about myths made true. A mother might point to the thumb and say, "Remember." Children absorbed the syntax of dominance before they could quote a law. The next parade through the streets would find them ready to play their part, leaning over railings, falling into the chant, offering the minimal complicity of looking. The state needed beasts keepers and crews. It also needed spectators. Without them, punishment is private pain. With them, it is policy broadcast and memorized. That was the amphitheater's final perfection, to turn the many into an instrument that sounded on cue. From the Imperial box, punishment became policy. The amphitheater was never just stone and sand. It was a stage where rulers learned to shape emotion, wonder in the morning, dread at noon, satisfaction by dusk, and attach their names to the cycle. The seat of that authorship was the Pulvinar, the emperor's viewing platform, whose private approach, tunnels, and guarded corridors dramatized sovereignty as architecture. Recent restorations even opened to the public a sealed passage, popularly linked to Commodus, an emperor's only artery that once delivered the princeps directly into his box, unseen by the crowd until he chose to be seen. The message is as old as empire. The ruler controls not only the script, but the entrances and exits. What did emperors do with that vantage? Ancient biographers, often hostile, often moralizing, insist some made cruelty a craft. Suetonius's portrait of Caligula reads like a catalogue of staged humiliations, a show manager beaten with chains over several days, until the stench of his putrefied brain forced a final blow. An Atellan farce writer burned alive in the arena for a double entendre, a Roman knight first thrown to beasts, then dragged out to have his tongue cut off, then tossed back in. Even allowing for exaggeration, the pattern is clear, the ruler as stage director calibrating pain for effect. Caligula also built and planned venues and amphitheatre, begun near the Septa Julia, probably to extend his capacity to host Rome, folding brickwork and budget into a spectacle program that tied largesse to loyalty. Whether every project was completed is debated, but the intent to rule through shows is well attested in the building notices and later summaries. Nero, by contrast, blurred the line between patron and performer. Our sources: Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius, Dio, agree. He loved the stage and public competitions. He organized festivals on Greek models and appeared as singer-actor and charioteer. A spectacle that scandalized elites even as it delighted parts of the crowd. His appearances at games, his staged victories, and his manipulation of schedules fit a politics of presence. The princeps not merely watching the script of power, but entering it. These reports are colored by senatorial disdain, but the through line remains: emperors could treat the city's attention as an instrument to be tuned. If the emperor was maestro, the editor, the official who put on the games, was the principal conductor. Under the Principate, the editor's role fused with state office. Private munera required imperial permission and followed rules on cost, seating, and order. That bureaucracy matters because it shows how cruelty was standardized. An office holder commissioned beasts, contracted crews, approved programs, and stood where the crowd could see him decide, with a gesture, what mercy meant. The box made law visible. The editor made it feel participatory. The box also set the moral temperature. A magistrate who paused before signaling could make the audience ache for resolution. A ruler who leaned forward during a mythic reenactment told the city which feelings to have. Later writers insist bad emperors staged new torments or intensified old ones to advertise dominion. An interpretive frame you should read with caution, because tyrants' cruelty is a genre of ancient writing as much as a description. Cassius Dio, for instance, tends to bundle sexual excess and theatrical sadism when portraying bad emperors, building a moral case through curated horrors. The composite picture still teaches whatever the precise details. Spectacle was governance, and the imperial gaze was part of the machinery. Archaeology and logistics fill in what rhetoric distorts. An emperor's approach tunnel leads to a box placed on the axis so that every eye can triangulate power. The seating scheme radiates status outward. The day's program is a metronome. That physical grammar made imperial signals legible to 50,000 bodies at once. Even the costs were regulated. Senatorial decrees attempted to cap spending on gladiators and games, so the duty to please the crowd wouldn't bankrupt provincial elites. Evidence that spectacle was an economy as well as a ritual. Apply this to our parade victim crossing the sand. The herald's cadence, the animal's release, the music that swells, none of it is free form. If the emperor nods toward a mythic charade, the audience understands the cue. If he hardens his face at a plea for mercy, the thumb language below follows him, whether or not he physically gestures. Modern debates about exactly which thumb meant death are almost beside the point. The point is that the crowd signs were taught, and the teacher sat in the center. Do the lurid vignettes about Caligula and Nero, doing it themselves, prove literal participation in sexualized punishments? Some, like Suetonius's grimmest anecdotes, almost certainly exaggerate or moralize. What we can say with confidence is that emperors curated proximity, commissioning shows, building or modifying venues, timing appearances, rewarding favorites, disciplining producers, and at times using the theater of punishment to intimidate enemies and impress visiting elites. The spectacle's political purpose is not controversial. It staged order as entertainment and made obedience feel like a festival. The emperor's hand, seen or unseen, turned that wheel. As the editor reads the sentence and the gate crews prepare the next release, the ruler's silhouette remains still, a public stillness that tells the city, this machine is his. In a world that measured authority by who could command a crowd's breath, the imperial box was the loudest silence of all. They were Rome's most protected women, walking privileges wrapped in white, freed from male guardianship, escorted with fasces, as if they were magistrates, empowered to free a condemned man by mere encounter. They kept the city's central promise alive. Vesta's fire so that war and winter could not touch Rome's heart. But protection was a coin with two faces. Because the Vestals embodied the city's purity, their failures were read as the city's failures. Their bodies were made into instruments of reassurance. When a Vestal stumbled, the state answered with a ritual whose cruelty pretended to be piety. Plutarch, sober and spare, lays the rule down without ornament for small infraction stripes in darkness, for broken chastity burial alive near the Colline gate. The paradox begins with privilege. A Vestal could make a will as if she were a father of a household. She could manage property without a male guardian. She was given seats of honor at games. The crowd parted for her as for a symbol, because that is what she was, a walking treaty between Rome and the gods. Plutarch lists the exemptions and courtesies, each one a bright thread in a garment woven to say that Rome's safety had a human face. But the same passage that praises their standing also sketches the shadow. The Pontifex Maximus himself, high priest and political figure, may scourge a delinquent vestal on her bare flesh, behind a curtain punishment veiled, because the sacred could not be profaned by open blood, yet punishment all the same. A city that flattered with honours also kept a scourge in the sacristy. The worst offence had a legal name, incestum, not incest in our narrow sense, but any ritual contamination of vowed chastity. Once declared by the College of Pontiffs, the sentence could not spill blood inside the ritual boundary. Burial within the pomerium was normally forbidden, and yet the law demanded a death the city could call bloodless. The solution was a chamber underground, stocked with a lamp, a little oil and bread tokens that let officials claim the victim had not been killed but left to the gods' judgment. The site had a name that sounded like a diagnosis campus celeratus, the evil field set just inside the Colline Gate on the city's north. An exact topography that antiquarians later tried to place under the modern streets near the finance ministry. The precision matters because it shows this was not a tale told vaguely. It was an address. The procession that delivered a condemned vestal to that mound inverted funeral and wedding at once. Later summaries describe her stripped of vestal badges, veiled like a corpse borne through the forum, while kin wept a city, performing grief at a death it had scripted. The Pontifex spoke formulas, attendants handed down the tokens of survival, then retreated. A ladder was withdrawn. Earth closed. The law had kept its fictions. No bloodshed, no corpse buried in the city, only a disappearance under sanctioned ground. The theology worked like a legal brief. If the gods wished to save her, they would. If they did not, Rome had only made provision. This is how ritual can launder violence. Stories fastened to names. Cornelia Vestalis Maxima, under Domitian, is said to have been condemned despite protesting innocence. Her execution part of a moral theatre that let a suspicious emperor posture as purifier. Livy and later writers preserve other cases where suspicion hinged on rumour fashion or portents. We should read these dossiers with caution. Ancient sources also record acquittals. Postumia, in 420 BCE, for example, scolded for bold laughter, but spared the pit proof that even in a system built for symbolism, people sometimes pushed back. Yet the machinery remained ready. When storms, famine, or enemy banners shook Rome's confidence, the question turned toward the temple court. Had the city's hearth been secretly profaned? A woman's body could be offered as the answer key. The logic, if that is the word, was symmetrical. Because vestals were the city's honoured exceptions, their fall could be staged as the city's repentance. Because their persons were inviolable, the punishment had to masquerade as non-violence. The curtain before the scourging, the lamp and bread in the chamber, the careful placement just within the boundary, every detail wrapped force in liturgy. Plutarch's matter-of-fact phrasing, stripes in darkness burial near the gate, gives us the bureaucratic tone of the thing. Nothing lurid, nothing shouted, only procedure. When 19th century topographers traced the campus celeratus on modern maps, they wrote as if plotting a cistern or a culvert. But naming the spot does not neutralize the act, it fixes it. There is one more twist in the paradox. The vestal's sacral status could save as well as doom. If a condemned man met a vestal in her litter, by chance his life might be spared, a quirk of custom that turned the priestess into a moving sanctuary. The same woman who could erase a death sentence by being seen could be erased herself by being unseen, sealed into ground, so that no one might look upon the city's embarrassment. The instrument of mercy and the object of immurement were the same office, the same body. Plutarch preserves both truths in adjacent lines because Rome lived them in adjacent streets. Walk the imagined route one more time. The paleness of the veil, the hush that falls when the pontifex raises his hand, the careful petty tokens, a little food. For a life that must end, a small lamp to ensure the death is not by darkness alone. The ladder lifted, earth tamped. Somewhere on the other side of the city, the public fire continues to burn, tended by women who will go on being saluted and served, who will keep the treaty bright. The ritual has done its political work. Anxiety is answered with ceremony. Scandal is buried under a nameable hill. The city tells itself that its purity is restored. And in that telling, you can hear why the punishment lasted so long. It let Rome believe that violence, if wrapped in sacred cloth, could be counted as devotion rather than guilt. Rome did not merely allow cruelty, it administered it. Behind the parade and the roar lay a paper world of charges, rosters, seating charts, budgets, and festival calendars, the quiet grammar that turned pain into policy. Start with jurisdiction. Many who ended on the sand were classed as noxii harm doers, a legal bucket broad enough to hold rebels, brigands, slaves under sentence, and in certain periods members of dissident sects. Once in that category, a person could be routed not to a private execution, but to a public one, including damnatio ad bestias, where the victim's death doubled as a civic lesson. The Latin is elegant. The result was not. The transfer from indictment to spectacle required offices and signatures. An editor, the official who put on the games, requisitioned beasts and equipment, contracted trainers, paid musicians, and coordinated with custodians of the amphitheatre. An urban machine of doors, traplifts, corridors, sand crews, and gate tenders. Morning shows, venationes with imported fauna, the noon block for the noxii, and the afternoon munera, gladiators. The day itself was a timetable, not an improvisation. When modern handbooks summarize the program, beasts at dawn, executions at midday, gladiators toward evening, they are distilling what the stone architecture already teaches. This was a scheduled industry. The ledger extended to the audience. Augustus's seating law, often called the Lex Julia Theatralis, sorted bodies by rank and at times by sex and marital status, broadcasting hierarchy in the very act of looking. Senators in the best lines of sight, equestrians in their bands, youths with tutors clustered as a civics lesson in miniature. The view itself was a statute. To attend a punishment was to read the law with one's eyes tier by tier, as if the city had turned into an open-air diagram of power. Then there were the scripts. Executions could be generic binding to a stake. Release of a cat or bear, or meticulously framed as episodes the audience already knew from poetry and art. K.M. Coleman's classic study labels these productions fatal charades myth enacted so that killing wore the mask of story. That required coordination between court docket and festival program, a charge selected for a feast day with a relevant myth. A condemned body matched to costume and prop, cues set for music and gate release. Bureaucracy supplied the bones of the show. Ideology supplied the skin. Even myth was an entry on a form. If the program promised Durst the crews prepared yokes and rope work for a bull, if Parsifal, the prop makers, arranged the obscene illusion Marshall boasts about when he claims the Flavian amphitheatre made the old stories true, the state wanted more than death. It wanted an old death. A death that could pretend to be sanctioned by legend, so that punishment felt like the enforcement of cosmic precedent. Once the myth was chosen, the clock took over doors drums, animal handlers heralds. What looks like chaos from the floor is metronome from the box. Law also laundered scruple. Inside the sacred boundary pomerium, certain forms of bloodshed were ritually troublesome. Priestly colleges guarded those lines. The solution again was procedural push. The bloody acts outside the line, or redefine the act so that it counted as bloodless in the legal fiction immurement for a vestal rather than a blade scourging behind a curtain, executions timed and cited to square ritual with appetite. The point is not that Romans were squeamish. It is that they were administrators, and administration can convert qualm into workflow. Pricing appeared everywhere, once you know where to look. Animal purchase and transport, fodder keeper wages, carpenters for scenery, sand crew water bearers, trumpeters, scribes to draft the edict, a herald to recite the sentence. The line item that looks like entertainment in a civic budget masked another column labeled deterrence. The crowd's roar was not an accident the state tolerated. It was an output the state procured. To secure that output, you regulate attendance seating laws, underwrite supply beast contracts, and stabilize narrative scripts and cues. In short, you make cruelty predictable. Even the gesture for mercy or death lived inside this ecosystem. Whether polis verso meant a turned or hidden thumb is debated today, but in antiquity, the editor presided, and the audience performed a learned code. The law did not always bind the hand, yet procedure taught it how to move. A magistrate's pause to feel the noise of the benches was a governance technique. Harvest consent before confirming the sentence, and the punishment leaves fewer splinters in memory. That sense of participation, illusory or not, was part of the ledger's profit. None of this denies the arena's savagery. It clarifies its rationality. A city that could survey provinces and calibrate taxes could also calibrate terror. The categories Noxious Hostis Servus streamed people into different ends. The calendar pinned their ends to market days and imperial birthdays. The amphitheatre translated docket numbers into scenes. When the gates opened and a costumed figure stumbled into sand, you were not watching the eruption of chaos. You were watching form schedules and budgets convert a human being into a public message with the efficiency of a mint-striking coin. That is the darkest Roman inheritance. Not that they killed, but that they made killing administratively elegant. And when the crews raked the grit flat for the next event, the office world resumed notes to replenish lamp oil orders to patch a sticking gate, a complaint to the treasury that leopards are dearer. This season, a memo about crowd flow on the northwest stairs, policy at midday maintenance, by dusk, memory at dinner. By morning, the ledgers would be ready to price another lesson. When the crowd emptied from the amphitheatre, the show did not end. It followed them home, settling onto plastered walls and polished tableware, into the little theatres of dining rooms, where friends reclined on couches and retold the day over wine. The Romans called the household a domus, but it was also a museum of the owner's tastes and loyalties, a curriculum for guests. You entered, and the vestibule greeted you with a floor mosaic that could be a garden of birds, a mask from comedy, sometimes a leopard mid-leap, or a netting scene where a hunter drives spears into a boar. In the triclinium, where a host performed generosity paintings, showed victories, myths, and pleasures, and every so often the brush strayed near the arena. Not always explicit, rarely a literal execution, but often close enough that the boundary blurred hunts that felt like morning Venetionas. Heracles grappling a Nemean lion with the same stance you had watched a bestiarius copy at dawn. A raging bull that looked to eyes still full of sand and trumpet, like the one that dragged Dirce. If the amphitheatre was the city's stage, the dining room was the replay edited by status and taste. We should be honest about evidence. Archaeology gives us domestic murals and mosaics heavy with animal fights, heroic struggles, and theatrical masks. Inscriptions and epigrams give us jokes about yesterday's show, boasts about a patron's seats, or grumbles about the price of leopards. What we do not have in quantity are wall paintings that straightforwardly depict a woman's sexualized execution. The home was not a public newsroom. It was an aspirational space, so the imagery tends to sublimate violence as myth sport, virtue the same alchemy, the arena used but toned to dinner talk. Still, saturation is saturation. When a child grows up walking past a floor of dolphins snapping at fish, and a panel of a hunter straddling a cat, that child learns to see domination as decor. Writers noticed the bleed-through. Poets turned the day's spectacles into bite-sized scenes, made for recitation over dessert. Martial's epigrams about the Flavian amphitheatre were designed to be quoted at table marvels jokes, a little scandal, a lot of pride in what the city could now stage. He brags that the arena made the old stories true, a line tailor-built for a host prizing his guests with novelty. The poem is a souvenir and an advertisement, a portable version of the morning's awe. What power once repeated at scale poetry makes repeatable. Moralists also peered into the dining room and shuddered. One Christian polemicist rails that the games train rage and lust, that what you praise in public you practice in private, that a man who applauds blood will carry that appetite home. He did not need to find a fresco of execution to make the case. The corridor between sand and supper was crowded enough with sounds and faces, with nicknames and rumours, with the sickly sweetness of incense and sweat. Anecdotes from secular writers echo the concern, without the preaching friends lured back to the games by memory alone. A whole evening talked away comparing beasts, a son quizzing his father on which thumb meant what and why. The house is quieter than the arena, but no less didactic. Objects tell the same story in miniature. Lamps stamped with gladiators, circulated like team merchandise. Knives with handles shaped like helmeted heads set the tone at cutting boards. Little bronzes of wrestlers and fighters perched on shelves. A child's toy might be a wooden sword. These are not confessions of cruelty, so much as signs of normalization. When violence becomes a motif on the thing that lights your room, the thing that slices your fruit, it becomes a habit in the mind. The arena does not need to be painted on the wall if its grammar lives in your fingers. Hospitality ritual reinforces the lesson. A dinner begins with a blessing and a boast. The vintage, the olives, the lamp oil, the fresh figs. Then the conversation tilts back to the day's show. The host recounts the most astonishing kill, as if narrating a hunt he himself had arranged. A guest competes with a story from last month's festival. The old man at the far couch recites a favorite couplet about Caesar's wonders. A slave pours wine, while men who have never held a spear describe the angle of a killing blow with the tenderness reserved for art. Laughter gels into consensus, and consensus is how a city agrees what is normal. There were houses where pity sat in the corner like a guest without a cushion. Not everyone laughed. Some hosts banned arena talk the way they banned politics when drunk cousins came over. But custom is a slow river. Even a few quiet houses could not divert it. The city's calendar brought the spectacles back, and the poems were short, and the lamps were cheap, and the children begged to see the animals again. The domus was a filter, not a wall. Yet the filter had consequences, because home life transmuted public cruelty into private conversation, and collectible charm resistance had to climb a steeper grade. To condemn the arena was to rebuke your friend's taste, his mosaicist, the gifts on his shelves, the pride he took in knowing the signals of mercy and death. A complaint about bloodshed became a social faux pas. Morality had to fight not only the state's machine, but the dinner party's warmth. You can hear the frustration in the moralists' voices. If the city would only stop looking, the shows would wither. But looking had been braided into leisure, into how people lit rooms and measured generosity and taught stories to their children. Once that happened, the state's work was easy. The domus carried the sound of the stands, even when the door was closed. Imagine our parade victim rendered safe for walls. Our painter puts horns on a mask and calls it Pasiphae. A guest smiles because he saw that myth come true in the flesh. The memory trades its blood for ochre and survives with better manners. Another panel shows a boar balked by dogs, not a woman balked by chains. The line between sport and sentence blurs just enough to oil the talk. If someone speaks of the woman, it is with the grammar of spectacle. She was a part, a prop, a warning. In that syntax, a person cannot be mourned because she was never allowed to be singular. She was already a story when she walked into the sand. And so the dining room meant, for comfort, became the arena's echo chamber. Between bites and toasts, Rome rehearsed its lessons. That power is natural, that suffering is instructive, that a well-staged death can be a kind of art. The next morning, when the shutters went up and the chains began to clink on stone, the city did not have to be taught how to look. It had been practicing all night. Stop. Criticism did not arrive as a single trumpet blast. It came as murmurs in pews, as letters from bishops, as converts who could not stop shaking after an afternoon at the games. Early Christian writers did not simply call the arena cruel. They called it a rival liturgy. Incense music sacrifice. Only the god appeased was the crowd. Tertullian wrote his tract De Spectaculis like an exorcism for the senses. If Christians are who they claim to be, he argues they cannot regale themselves with human blood. The amphitheater's rituals are idolatry disguised as entertainment. The book is urgent because many believers still went. The line between everyone goes and we must not go had to be drawn word by word, and still the pull was strong. Augustine gives us the most intimate case study. His friend Alypius, determined to keep his eyes shut at a gladiatorial show, is ambushed by a single shout. Clamour ingens a mighty roar. Curiosity pries his eyelids open. The sight wounds him deeper than the fighter's wound below. Disgust flips into appetite. Augustine's Latin reads like clinical notes on addiction. Sound invades vision. Follows desire, takes root. It is the clearest surviving account of spectatorship as capture, and of how a crowd can rewire a conscience in one heartbeat. From pulpit to palace, critique, broadened into policy. Uneven, delayed, sometimes cosmetic, but real. Emperors of the 4th and early 5th centuries issued measures that in fits and starts curtailed portions of the spectacle. In the West, Honorius's reign frames the familiar story. Later summaries and compendia record bans on gladiatorial combat in 399 and again in 404. Church historians linked the latter to the martyrdom of a monk named Telemachus, who reportedly leapt into an arena to stop a fight and was killed for it. Theodoret, writing in the 5th century, gives the canonical version news of the monk's death, moved Honorius to put a stop to the gladiatorial combats. The linkage monk dies emperor bans is powerful because it gives a single date and a saintly cause. But even Theodore's own telling leaves room for politics as well as piety. What can be said with confidence? That by the early 5th century, the Munera gladiatorial combats in the West were legally constrained and likely fading in Rome. That emperors had long tried to curb the financial burden of shows on cities. That Christian moral pressure gave officials new language for old fiscal and public order concerns. But the broader game's ludi were hydra-headed. Animal hunts, venationes, and execution spectacles could persist, even as gladiator schools closed. By late antiquity, some regions still hosted beast shows long after formal gladiatorial matches waned. The end was not a light switch. It was a dimmer turned slowly, unevenly, and not always for the same reasons everywhere. And the Telemachus tale. Its bones are respectable. A 5th century ecclesiastical historian reports a monk's intervention and a subsequent imperial ban. But the cinematic version, one heroic leap ends. All bloodsport overnight is almost certainly too neat. Theodore wrote decades after the event. He aimed to edify as well as record. Later retellings embroidered the scene with details that vary by source. The story's durability teaches what the footnotes already show. Moral imagination likes hinges, but history prefers gradients. As with much late Roman policy, piety, prestige, budget, and fear of disorder all pulled on the same rope. Christian ambivalence also mattered. Some bishops thundered, others tolerated local compromises. Many congregants went on attending until pastors named the habit from the ambo. The same Augustine, who anatomized Alypius's fall, also knew how hard it was to break the loop. Friends swore off the games and then relapsed at the next festival. Sons told fathers they would only watch the animal shows. A convert sat in a top tier and claimed distance was innocence. Even Tertullian's insistence that the arena is pagan worship tacitly admits a problem. If Christians needed to be warned, then Christians were in the seats. Legal edicts, when they came, spoke the language of order more than mercy. A law might forbid judges to sentence certain classes to the arena, not because the condemned were sacred, but because the act created disorder or offended a new official piety. Honorius's rescripts are cited as markers, so are later reiterations under Valentinian III. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the empire, different entertainments filled the vacuum chariot races. Most famously, suggesting that what declined was not crowds' appetite for spectacle, but one particular grammar of it. The moral rhetoric targeted blood, the political machinery redirected crowds. Did Christianization alone shut the gates? No single cause can carry that weight. The 3rd century crisis had strained finances and reshaped urban life. Recruiting and maintaining gladiators cost money. Amphitheaters needed upkeep. Civic elites had less to spend on glory projects. Imperial largesse had other theatres to subsidize. Christianity provided a critique and a constituency for change. But economics and administration did much of the grinding work. The result was uneven. In some cities, gladiators stopped. Venationes lingered. Executions went on under new names. Only over generations did crowds forget how to read the old cues. And yet the critique left a permanent mark. Augustine's portrait of Alypius does not end in despair. It ends in conversion in a friend who eventually refuses to be owned by the raw. The church that once accommodated spectators learned to baptize abstainers. Sermons reshaped dinner talk. Processions replaced parades of shame. A martyr's story, tidy or not, walked farther than any senatorial decree. If the amphitheatre taught Rome how to feel on cue, late antique Christianity slowly retaught the city how to abstain, stumble, argue, and abstain again. The mirror cracked, and through the fracture light began to leak, uneven, refracted, but real. The crowds did not vanish, they repopulated other shows. But the grammar of death as entertainment, once a civic catechism, lost its fluency. First in whispers, then in law, and finally in habit. The bones of the old system still speak from the sand. So do the letters that struggled against it. Between them is the slowest kind of revolution, the kind that changes what a city thinks a festival is for. Endings rarely look like endings when you stand inside them. From the sand's eye level, the program kept beating its old rhythm drums at dawn dust, at noon. Cheers at dusk, even as the scaffolding that held it up began to creak. The first failing part was money. Exotic animals had to be trapped, fed, guarded, shipped. Amphitheatres demanded constant repair. Gladiator schools ate salaries, doctors' fees, trainers, managers. After the 3rd century crises, plagues, civil wars, inflation, the municipal treasuries that once bragged about their largesse discovered that spectacle is a bottomless amphora. Provincial elites who used to buy votes by buying games went searching for cheaper languages of prestige. Baths, basilicas, grain doles, church building. A city does not stop wanting applause. It changes what earns it. Law followed the budget like a shadow. Edicts that look moral in retrospect often read in context like fiscal management caps on spending for games, limits on the number of gladiators' requirements that editors seek permission before mounting shows that could bankrupt a town. The state had always regulated spectacle to keep order. Now it also regulated to keep cities solvent. This is the bureaucratic face of decline. No trumpet blast, only a slow narrowing of permissions, until a tradition finds itself boxed in by forms. A festival once advertised on painted boards becomes a negotiation with the prefect's office. The red-letter days on the calendar thin. The beast trader's letters arrive less often. The amphitheatre superintendent starts a second ledger marked "repairs deferred." Christianization gave officials new words and new constituencies. Bishoprics grew into civic powers. Sermons named the games as idolatry. Catechumens were told that baptism and bloodsport make a crooked pair. But moral pressure alone did not pry the gates shut. It met the economy halfway. If a governor could save money, calm clergy, and still keep crowds busy with chariot races in the circus, the calculation was easy. In some cities, gladiatorial combat faltered early, while venaciones, the animal hunts, persisted, a compromise that let authorities claim cleaner hands while preserving the crowd's dose of risk and raw. Elsewhere, the sequence reversed or staggered, depending on coffers, clergy, and custom. A pan-imperial ban sounds tidy in a book. On the ground, it translated into a patchwork of practice. The buildings themselves began to tell the story of fatigue. Earthquakes cracked rings of stone, floods gnawed at lower tiers, stairs sagged where thousands had trod them thin. In Rome, the great amphitheatre took strike after strike from time and weather. Some repairs came gloriously advertised with imperial names, others did not. Seats fell to weeds, vomitoria darkened, the underfloor service corridors filled with drifted silt. In the provinces, amphitheatres found second lives stones, pried out for houses and churches, arenas repurposed as markets' corrals, even fortress courtyards in cities that suddenly needed walls more than spectacles. When a place designed to stage death becomes a place to sell onions or stow hay, you have a better witness to cultural change than any edict can offer. Crowds drifted to other entertainments that could be staged with lighter logistics. The circus, with its teams, colors, songs, proved resilient. You could rally a city with chariot factions without importing a leopard. The theatre and the odium too could pivot to new music, new plays, new preachments without rebuilding the stage. The appetite for collective feeling did not weaken, it rebranded. Even imperial charisma, migrated rulers learned to court favor from the circus box, to sponsor horse races and distributions, rather than fatal charades. The empire's attention economy adapted while the old amphitheatre economy starved. Memory changed more slowly than habit. For a while, people still spoke arena, the way retired sailors still speak sea. Old men could show a mark on the stone and say, "Here the gate stuck one afternoon and the bull turned." A widow could remember the day her husband's client won a purse with the net and trident. Children born too late to see gladiators played at them in alleys with broomsticks and kitchen lids. But the code that had once told the whole city when to hush and when to roar ceased to be native. Gestures grew uncertain. Boys guessed wrong about the famed thumb. A line from Marshall. The old stories made true stopped landing at dinner because fewer guests could picture the staging. When a city forgets how to visualize a boast, the boast is almost gone. There were still Spike's governors who paid for a last round to please veterans. Barbarian kings in Italy who tried to keep beast shows going as a Roman-looking luxury. A holiday when someone in a provincial town dusted off the old drums. But even the revivals confessed their lateness. The more a show has to advertise itself as revival, the less it belongs to the present tense. Audiences who once needed no prompting now needed posters. A ritual that must be explained is halfway to being a museum piece. The moral arguments too shifted register. Early Christian polemics had cast the arena as a rival altar. Later, homilies barely needed to mention it. The fiery pages of De Spectaculis made sense when parishioners still slipped into upper tiers on festival days. 2 generations on preachers found other habits to hunt gambling gossip, the theatre's suggestive mimes, the circus's partisan brawls. Like any successful critique, the anti-arena sermon erased part of its own target. What remained of the old grammar of public humiliation migrated to smaller stages, the market square pillory, the whip in the barracks, the rumour mill that could ruin a household. Spectacle did not die, it atomized. Stand again before the great oval and listen. The wind makes a sound in broken arcades that could be a cheer if you have the right kind of nostalgia. But no gatemasters answer it, no sand crew rakes the floor, no editor checks his roster and nods to musicians. A hawker sells chestnuts where once a herald read sentences. Children chase each other around a pier of travertine and pretend it is a tower. The building is still there, and it still teaches, but the lesson has changed. Where it once taught a city to agree on death, it now teaches a city how quickly certainty can crumble when costs rise. Stories tire gods, change ledgers, bleed, and the crowd learns new songs. The undoing took a century and more, and even then it refused a single date. That is how cultures stop doing things with paperwork and weather, with fashion and famine, with a law here and a shrug there, with the quiet bankruptcy of an appetite that no longer pays for itself. By the time the last official games had come and gone, most citizens did not miss what they no longer remembered how to want. The arena had been a school. It also had an alumnus us. What we attend, what we pay for, what we replay at home becomes our curriculum. In the next part, we will carry that caution forward out of the stone ellipse and into the modern appetite for public shaming to ask what our descendants will say about our favorite lessons. Step out of the ruins and into a lit screen. The stone ellipse has become a rectangle you hold in your hand. The crowd is still a crowd, only silent and everywhere. Rome's parade trained citizens to look together. Our networks train us to look alone, but in synchrony. A humiliation begins with a clip, 20 seconds ripped from context. A face we do not know fixed into a role. We already recognize villain, fool, traitor, monster. The shares do what drums used to do. The comments do what the benches used to do. The algorithms perform the old logistics of harm with new speed. They do not ask where to pause for maximum exposure. They calculate it. We must be precise. A viral pylon is not a woman dragged to beasts. Your gut knows the difference, but the grammar can rhyme. In Rome, the route was forced past temples, markets, and family homes. Now, a name is forced past search bars, group chats, and family feeds. Former neighbors do not line a street. They text links to cousins and alumni threads. A ritual that once needed gates and soldiers now needs only attention and a few thousand hands to press share. That is why the amphitheater feels ancient and familiar. At once it discovered that the spectacle does not need the consent of the condemned to proceed. It only needs the consent of the audience. There is a pedagogy too. Parents once nudged children forward so they would learn the lesson. Today, adults curate a young person's timeline as if the stream itself were a civics course. Look at what happens to people who say the wrong thing, wear the wrong shirt, stumble at the wrong mic. Schools run assemblies on digital citizenship, a phrase so tidy it hides the old anxiety that a crowd's appetite once awakened can feed on anyone, and the chorus that begins with justice can end with jeering. When shame is public and durable, cached, indexed, replayable, it graduates from event to identity, the way a noon execution once turned a person into a story. What about myth? Rome glued law to legend so that punishment felt ordained. We glue outrage to narrative templates so that judgment feels pre-decided: the corrupt official, the cruel teacher, the careless nurse, the sly neighbor. Templates save time. They also erase particulars. A clip somersaults through commentary until it stops being about a person and becomes about a type. The arena called this Pacificae Dursa Loriolus. We call it a hashtag. Either way, a single word can yoke a body to a moral people think they know. The old logistics also have new economics. An editor once paid for beasts musicians, sand crews, heralds. A platform now pays for servers, content moderators, ad auctions, and recommendation engines tuned to attention's fever curve. The crowd's roar used to be an output the magistrate procured. Today, engagement is an output shareholders require. That pressure shapes which spectacles get surfaced, how quickly remorse can compete with rage, and whether any institutional voice can say enough without being accused of censorship by one side and complicity by another. The amphitheater's budget lived in a ledger. Ours lives in a dashboard. You can watch the graph climb while a person's life buckles, and yet cautions. Analogies can seduce. Not every public reckoning is a charade. Not every exposure is cruelty. Sometimes the crowd sees what institutions refused to see. Sometimes a filmed abuse stops a worse one. Rome offered almost no appeal beyond a thumb. We have courts, ombuds, editors, due process, imperfect, slow, but real. The lesson of the amphitheater is not never look. It is know what your looking does. Ask who is staging what you are watching, what the incentives are, and how much of your emotion was composed in a room you will never see. If you want to test whether a spectacle is teaching or merely feeding, try this. Imagine you are wrong about the person on the screen. Could they recover? In a city that normalized public degradation, the answer was no. The ritual foreclosed return. Our answer will reveal whether we have escaped the old grammar or only re-skinned it. A culture that leaves no road back builds a soft arena and calls it justice. The house still matters. Romans carried spectacle home on lamps and poems. We carry it home on autoplay. There is a quiet power in refusing to be the household that turns punishment into dinner talk. The group chat that marinates in derision, the account that translates a stranger into a souvenir. Refusal is not glamorous. It is the opposite of a show. But the amphitheater's undoing, you recall, did not happen in a single decree. It happened by degrees. Budget lines crossed out festivals, unbooked benches, emptying families, choosing other songs. Small abstentions accumulated until producers could no longer count on a full house. So policy and habit both. Law can protect privacy, regulate amplification, punish coordinated harassment, and demand transparency from the machines that tune our attention. But habits are older than statutes. They live in the wrist that hovers over, send in the throat that resists the easy joke, in the patient work of reading a thread before deciding that one clip explains a life. The amphitheater trained people to feel on cue. We can unlearn that. Slow is not fashionable, but it is often merciful. And memory, finally. Rome kept names for places where it buried shame, the evil field, the scar by the gate. Our topography is subtler, a quiet absence where a voice used to post, a resume gap, a family that stops going to the park on Saturdays. If we must have monuments, let them be to repair to those who apologized without performance and changed, to those who forgave without pretending they had not been harmed, to those who stood in the current of attention and said enough and meant it. The arena taught an empire that humiliation could be logistics. We have inherited the logistics. We can choose the lesson. Ask before you share. Am I a witness, a judge, a participant, or just another seat in a show that promises order while feeding on a person? If the question stings, it is working. It means you have stepped out of the stands and back into the street, where looking is not compulsory and mercy is not a malfunction. Stop. We have walked the routes of spectacle, measured the machinery, heard the crowd. What we have not done is linger over names. Rome dressed power in marble inscriptions, lists of donors, generals, emperors. Yet, those who furnished the city's lessons most often left no letters behind them. The amphitheatre consumed names like a furnace consumes air. The first justice we can offer is stubborn, inadequate, and human, to look for the places where names almost surface and pull on the thread until a person, not a role, comes into view. Begin with the margins of official writing. Court dockets are lost, but legal formulae survive in summaries. And once in a while, a scribe's note scratches a detail that will not behave: a family relation, a district of origin, a trade. A wax tablet from a shop account will list 2 lamps to Livia the fuller's daughter, and a second tablet, months later, will mark a debt unpaid. The amphitheatre ledger has no Livia, none that we can prove, but the city did, and a girl who bought lamp oil is not far from a girl who might be seen in the wrong place on the wrong day when rumour ran ahead of her. If you want to resist the arena's erasure, you start by tying a person to a street and a smell: wet, wool, oil, clay, dust. You return them to a neighbourhood. Poetry, the very genre that advertised shows, can be wrestled into witness. Marshall boasts about myths made true, but he also leaves fingerprints of ordinary lives: barbers with nicknames, fruit sellers with jokes, garment washers who fight with lovers on stairwells. These are not the condemned. They are the city that watched. Yet, in their names, Eutychus, Afer, Chloe, you can hear how Rome sounded when it called across a market. A condemned woman once had a name like that. The priest who read the sentence withheld it. The crowd replaced it with a role. Our work is to replace the role with a name again, if only by analogy and care. Topography helps more than rhetoric. The campus Celeratus, that evil field near the Colline Gate, was not an abstraction. It was a point you could walk to and touch, where carts rattled by and soldiers drilled and children dared each other to peek. When you stand there in imagination and look down as if through soil, you can count the choices that made the whole: a priest's vote, a herald's breath, a carpenter's plank, a rope's roughness on a wrist. Those choices had makers with names and salaries. The victim had a mother with a name, a friend who would not say it aloud in public because the ritual demanded silence from love. Memory can be complicit. It can also be stubborn. Someone whispered the name at night after the house had settled and the neighbours could not hear. That whisper belongs in our script. Law so often, the masker of cruelty sometimes lets a face show through its slit of text. Aulus Gellius tells a story about a vestal, suspicious for her clothes and laughter, saved because judges chose to interpret character rather than rumour. The lesson is not that Rome was merciful. It is that particularity can still push against machinery when witnesses refuse to speak in types. The condemned women who did not meet such witnesses fell into categories: noxia, adulteress, traitor, witch. and categories are hunger with grammar. To feed that hunger, the city sanded off the corners of a person's life. The counter practice is to put corners back. Imagine one parade day and refuse the generic. The woman who staggers past a shrine is not an every woman. She is Sergia Marulla. Choose a common pairing, and she used to mend sandals in a booth near the baths. She told funny stories about clients' feet. She saved a coin here and there to buy a ribbon. Her cousin Rufa sold figs. Her father was dead before he reached 50. She did not break a god. She broke a custom, or she turned down the wrong man's hand, or she was blamed for a night fire because a neighbor envied her trade. The guards still drag. But now the lesson meets friction, because a crowd that knows a sandal mender has to work harder to make her a symbol. There is no court of history to certify that Sergia Marulla existed. The point is to unlearn the reflex that treats a suffering body as anonymous. When the sources deny the exact name, we borrow the most common ones and build a scaffold for imagination to do ethical labor. Graffiti gives us accents the monuments smooth away. On a wall in a back alley, you can still find letters punched into plaster by a man who fancied himself a poet and a woman who told him to do his boasting at home. She signed with a single line, a scratch of identity that refused to wait for permission. The arena had its own authors, producers, heralds, editors. But the city wrote back in small hands, and sometimes, in that swarm of petty claims and insults, you can hear a chorus that refuses the amphitheater's grammar. I was here, it says, and I saw, and I did not laugh. It is not a statute. It is better than nothing. Epitaphs, too, push from the ground. To my dearest freedwoman who deserved better. To my sister who knew every olive seller by name. To a good mother. The stones do not list crimes. They list relationships. The arena tried to end a life as an example. The epitaph insists on life as a web. Read enough of these, and you acquire a habit of mind that refuses to let any sentence end at the sand. You begin to ask the questions the program hid. Who missed a week of wages to stand in the sun at the gate? Who sold water there? Who hurried home sick? Who dared to take a longer route to avoid the procession and then lied about why? Sometimes the only name we can pronounce is a place. Evil Field is a kind of confession, like a city admitting that it had to quarantine its guilt under a euphemism. Say it out loud and feel how it refuses forgetfulness. Or take a lane where the parade always turned left because the stones there were smoother. Call it what a grandmother called it when she warned a child about festival days. Map the warning. A map with warnings is a city that remembers. We will not reclaim all the names. We will barely reclaim a few syllables, and many of them will be wrong. But the act done honestly changes how the camera sits in the mind. It lowers the lens from the box to the street and pauses long enough for a face to become particular. A culture that learns to say Sergia, where it once said example, disarms a small part of the machinery that made humiliation look like order. If you want to know whether our story has done any good, test your own memory tomorrow. When you think of Rome, do you see an emperor's profile on a coin or a woman walking past a shop where she once bought lamp oil? A neighbor whispering her name as the crowd refuses to. If the second image persists even a little, then the ledger has a scratch in it. Sometimes a scratch is where the light gets in. Before we close, we owe you the ledger behind the story. The method that turned scattered traces into a through line. Think of it as walking a city with 3 maps in hand. The first is literary poets, historians, moralists, jurists. The second is topographical, where gates stood, where processions turned, where a field earned a sinister name. The third is administrative, who signed the orders, who paid for beasts, where the seating laws placed bodies, so meaning could be read at a glance. None of these maps alone is enough. Together they let you move through the fog without pretending it is daylight. Begin with ancient authors, our noisiest guides and our most treacherous. Poets like Marshall sell wonder and flattery, but their boasts the old stories made true. Reveal how spectators were taught to see. Satirists sneer, yet their jokes inventory everyday knowledge. Ticket scarcity, vendor patter, the thrill of a midday execution. Biographers such as Suetonius and historians such as Cassius Dio love moralizing portraits of bad emperors, so we treat their lurid vignettes as arguments, not as photographs. What was the writer trying to prove? Whom were they trying to please or frighten? When a source piles sexual excess beside theatrical cruelty, we mark the rhetoric and ask whether archaeology law or parallel testimony sustain the charge. When they do not, we leave the sensational detail on the cutting room floor and keep the pattern that remains rulers, using spectacle to choreograph power. Next, the legal and priestly voices drier but steadier. Aulus Gellius preserves odd rules and case snippets that show how Romans categorized offense and ritual pollution. Plutarch, collecting Roman customs, records the curtain scourging of delinquent vestals and the immurement near the Colline Gate, giving us tone cool, administrative and coordinates. Later legal digests and imperial rescripts, even when excerpted or transmitted. Second-hand map procedures, who could sentence a person to beasts. What jurisdictions touched the games, which budgets underwrote, which acts. Law is not neutral. It is a mask that tells on itself. Its fictions, bloodless punishments, sacred boundaries that can be finessed. Let us see how scruple was managed into workflow. Topography then anchors words to ground. We align the author's place names with the city's bones, gates, roads, temples, amphitheatre, footprints, drains. A procession ceases to be an abstraction when you trace it past a shrine and through a market onto sand. A field of evil ceases to be a metaphor when antiquarian note street plans, and later building foundations triangulate a spot where a ritual once needed to hide. Likewise, the amphitheatre's architecture teaches logistics at a glance. Axial boxes for authority service, corridors for crews, trapdoors for queuing vomitoria for moving bodies like tides. Stone is a writer that cannot flatter. It tells you what scale and schedule a society thought normal. Archaeology also speaks in trash and scratches. Drain contents, nails, seeds, bone chips fix the rhythms of a day. Graffiti in corridors and on shop fronts catch voices that formal writers ignore. Boasts, seat jokes, faction taunts, a woman's quick line telling a swaggerer to hush. Mosaics and wall paintings in houses rarely show executions head-on, but their saturation with hunts, beasts and heroic grapples confirms how spectacle bled into pleasure. Lamps stamped with gladiators' knife handles carved like helmets. Objects that turned violence into motif testify to normalization better than any sermon can. Scholarly synthesis is where the maps are laid on top of one another. We rely on modern studies that classify the deadly reenactments as fatal charades, not to sensationalize, but to insist on the administrative nature of theatre docket linked to feast day, charge to costume cue to gate. We favour arguments that expose logistics budgets, staffing seating statutes, because logistics are hard to forge and easy to compare across cities and centuries. When sources clash, did a thumb up or down mean death? Did a particular emperor invent a torment? We resist the tidy snapshot and hold to the reproducible mechanism. The audience performed a learned code. Rulers curated proximity and pace. Producers obeyed calendars and costs. Chronology matters. We do not let late antique Christian polemic backfill the 1st century. Nor do we let Flavian triumphal poetry dictate what a 3rd century provincial town could afford. We track change, the long dimming of gladiatorial combat in parts of the West, the persistence of animal shows, the reuse of arenas as markets or fortresses. We separate mythic afterlives, saints, ending spectacles with a single brave leap from the lumpy reality of law-droughted treasuries and shifting tastes. The result is a gradient, not a switch. Silences have to be read with discipline. We refuse to supply what we cannot support, especially in the most incendiary claims. When a text's verb wobbles between metaphor and mechanics, we mark the wobble. When an anecdote survives in one hostile author without corroboration, we treat it as a window into anxiety rather than an X-ray of fact. But ethical imagination still has work to do, not to invent gore, but to restore particularity, where the record anonymized a victim on purpose. That is why we sometimes let a common Roman name stand in for the erased, so that the mind is trained to picture a neighbor, not a prop. Finally, we state our biases and limits. We believe logistics reveal ideology, that what a culture budget schedules, seats, and scripts, it believes. We believe public cruelty teaches, even when it insists it is only entertaining. We believe that the amphitheatre's most dangerous bequest is not a list of torments, but a habit of turning many onlookers into an instrument with one will. Everything you have just watched was built to be replicable, the parade route. The noon sentence, the cue, the roar. Our method triangulating text, stone, and statute lets you see the replication without letting the old machine conscript your gaze. This is the promise of evidence properly handled, not certainty where there is none but proportion, where heat usually lives. If we have done our work, you can now feel which claims are granite and which are plaster. You can walk the city with the right maps. You can tell the difference between a poet's trumpet and a clerk's minute book. And you can hear beneath both the footsteps of a woman whose name should have been carved and was not. Stand with me one last time at the threshold where street becomes sand. We have traced the route, the public ritual that turned humiliation into schooling, the sentence with its polished Latin name, the beasts trained as tools, the myths sewn to punishment so that story could authorize pain, the crowd rehearsed into an institution, the emperor shaping tempo from the box, the priestly court that buried the sacred without blood and called it piety, the law that kept accounts, the house that carried the spectacle home, the sermons that cracked the mirror, the slow unfastening of a habit that once felt like weather. At every turn, the same question pressed, who paid and who profited? And at every turn, bodies answered, the condemned paid with their lives. The city profited with a feeling it called order. What should we learn from a civilization that budgeted fear, timetabled cruelty, and sold seats to watch it work? Not that Rome was uniquely monstrous. Any state with enough stone and surplus can teach with pain. Rome merely left us the cleanest blueprint. The amphitheatre was a machine for manufacturing consent, sort the audience by rank, so hierarchy feels natural, set a schedule so expectation carries the crowd from appetite to judgment, choreograph a villain and bind the execution to a legend, so outrage can borrow authority, invite signals from the stands so punishment feels like a chorus rather than a decree. When that apparatus hums, pity has to shout to be heard, and even then the acoustics resisted. Yet, we also found hairline fractures, an old man who refuses to laugh, a child who looks away, a judge who chooses character over rumor, a monk whose story, tidy or not, outlives the day's show, a bishop who tells a congregation that their gaze is not neutral, a treasurer who decides the price is no longer worth the praise. The machine never runs on gears alone. It runs on habits. Change the habits, and the gears begin to slip. The decline of spectacle did not crown a single hero. It erased an appetite one ledger line and one empty bench at a time. The hardest lesson is about looking. We have insisted that spectatorship is not a byproduct, but a component. To witness is to participate when the ritual demands witnesses. That is why we lingered over seating plans and gestures, over the way a thumb could become a verb, over the way a poet's boast could become a dinner joke, over the way lamps and knives could smuggle the arena into the quiet rooms of a house. A culture teaches itself with what it repeatedly sees. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Logistics are ethics in disguise. What a city funds, schedules, scripts, and seats. What it turns into. Routine becomes its moral weather. We tried too to pull names back out of roles because the old machine thrived on anonymity. A person is hard to punish in public. A type is easy. So we asked you to picture a sandal mender with a cousin who sells figs, to stand at a name field by a name gate, to hear a whisper after dark. That is not sentimentality. It is counter-logistics. Particularity gums the cogs. It makes myth stutter. It pushes a rumor off balance. It is why epitaphs, those stubborn little ledgers of love, outlast edicts in the heart, and modern echoes. We were careful. A viral pylon is not a noon execution. But the grammar can rhyme a route of exposure, a rehearsed audience, a template that turns a stranger into a part. The question that tests whether we have escaped the old logic is simple. Can someone come back? Rome built rituals that foreclosed return. If we make public life a sequence of non-returnable moments, we will have rebuilt the ellipse without stone. So when you leave this film, I hope you carry 3 images. First, the ledger, not a metaphor, but the actual arithmetic of a culture that priced fear and called the sum justice. Second, the scratch, the tiny mark in that ledger, where a witness hesitates, a boy looks away, a magistrate delays his hand, a crowd refuses the cue. Third, the gate closed on a ritual we no longer know how to stage, because we no longer agree to play our parts. If those images stay, then the past has done its work, not by dazzling you with gore or drowning you in footnotes, but by letting you hear how machines made of people sound when they start to slow. Walk out with eyes that know how much engineering a spectacle requires, and how easily engineering can hide inside words like tradition, order, and law. Walk out with a soft refusal in your throat, the kind that changes dinner talk and budgets, and the way a city teaches its young. The bones will always speak. The question is, what story we teach our hearing to assemble from their sentences. Rome tried to make one story final humiliation, as pedagogy death, as pageant spectatorship, as duty. We have other stories to choose. And if tomorrow you find yourself in a crowd, when a ritual of exposure begins on a street, on a screen, in a room where laughter gathers like kindling, remember the route we traced. Ask, who selected the path? Who set the pauses? Who profits when you keep looking? Then consider becoming the friction the program did not budget for the delayed share. The withheld jeer, the hand that guides a child away from the rail. Empires teach, so do refusals. The ledger closes when enough people stop balancing it. We began with a price. We end with a choice. When triumphs are tallied, may no one's silence be the coin that pays for them. May the field, once called evil, be left to grass and footsteps that are simply on their way home. May names survive their stories, and may our looking at last remember what names are for.